Welcome to the Applied Edge podcast. I'm Adi Ben-Ari, and this is the show where enterprise leaders talk candidly about technology decisions reshaping their industries, whether it's AI, blockchain, privacy, and what it actually takes to deploy them at scale.
There's a new apex predator on the market, and that apex predator is capable of eating your business. Anthropic is paying more than they ever did, and they're hiring more engineers than ever before. We've never in the history of the world said, hey, you do the thinking for me.
Today's guest is Michael Muthukrishna. Michael is a professor at NYU and LSE, and he's also author of a book called The Theory of Everyone, which is an amazing book which we touched on during the conversation. I first met Michael when I was taking the LSE Executive AI course. It was only about a month or two ago, but he's an amazing lecturer, sort of really broad background and knowledge, and covers a lot of bases, and I thought it'd be amazing to have him on the show. So enjoy the episode. Michael Muthukrishna, welcome to the Applied Edge podcast.
So great to be here, Adi.
Michael, for our audience, you've got quite a varied and interesting background. You and I met at the LSE when you were giving the course there on AI for leadership and for management. Please give us a little bit of background just so people understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, sure. So you were in one of our exec courses on AI and the future of organizations, which we run at LSE because, we really think that the technology is kind of there, but it's the human element that's really lagging behind. So how do we integrate these into actual human systems? How do we integrate these in ways that actual people and organizations can work with in an effective way? So I'm probably unusually well prepared to teach the course for a few different reasons. The first is that my background was in engineering, so I'm probably maybe one of the few people, if not the only person in the LSE who's trained a neural network from scratch. And actually my first paper was also on, at the time, were language models, and I guess you would call them a small language model at this point. So I'm able to kind of speak to the technology, but then also because a lot of my work is on behavioral science and innovation and cooperation and cultural evolution and organizational change, kind of bring that human element together with the technology to provide some insights to business leaders like yourself.
Amazing. I mean, it was a really interesting course. I think we had a great set of people there as well.
Oh, for sure.
And a real variety, a lot of input. I found it super interesting as more of a pure techie, to kind of get much more of that, the people angle and the organization angle and all the challenges there. Can you give us a bit of a summary maybe at a high level of what the main points are that you'd like to bring to the course and to that audience?
First to say, it was really great to have you on the course. The team really curates these group of individuals very carefully. It was just nice to have both a mix of practitioners and people with very little AI background, and then of course people like yourself who already understand the technology and are just looking for the kind of human element. The idea behind the course is, we're not trying to teach you, how to do backprop or, any of the basic algorithms, but we are trying to leave you with enough of a mental model that you understand that, let's say a neural network or, a large language model in particular, these are not lookup systems. They are really storing kind of an abstract world model, if you like, how these get trained, why they are like, let's say, autocomplete and why they're not. So a sufficient kind of mental model for a non-technical user for how the technology works without getting into any of the math or the algorithms. But then from there, we look at, well, given that this technology exists and given what is on the horizon with these models doubling in capabilities every 7 months, where are we now and where are we likely to be, and where does the human fit into this? So for example, how does a leader make a decision about when the AI should be integrated in a way that augments a human decision maker, and it's essential that a human stays in the loop? And when is it better for it to be completely automated, where the AI is really taking care of things and a human is kind of overseeing it the way that you might oversee a team of employees, where you really don't need to know the details, but you do need to check the output. So there's that aspect of it. And the simple things like what are the concerns that people might have when a leader deploys AI in a company? What are the common mistakes that people make? So we describe dealing with AI as almost like AI communication. So what are the places where humans are overconfident about what the machines are capable of doing, and where they're not allowing the machine to do enough? I could keep going over the full course, but a lot of it, I will say, is also there are certain subjects like math or programming or even the use of AI where you can't really learn it you can't read math and then know math. You have to do math. You can't read programming. You have to actually program. Same kind of thing with AI. Like, so we try to make it very applied. We go through clear case studies about here's a failure case. Air Canada, for example, launches an AI chatbot as customer service. It hallucinates. Who's responsible for that? Who carries the risk when organizations deploy these technologies? All of that kind of thing.
Yeah, so the business implications,
Exactly.
I guess the people implications, like how does this land with the team? How do people see it relative to their roles? How does it, how do you organize this within the firm and so on? Right?
How do we do it in the smoothest possible way? Exactly.
Michael, you're quite close to a lot of firms working in the space. What are you seeing? You know, we kind of get these reports all the time and headlines and all the rest of it. What are you seeing? What are you feeling on the ground in terms of sort of where interesting things are happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's massive variability, right? You even saw that in the course, where some companies have been testing and experimenting and trying things for a long enough time that they're really well ahead of where most other companies are. And the others, there's a sense that, look, AI is important. Like, everybody knows it's important, so we're going to assign somebody the role of thinking about how AI is integrated into the organization, and maybe we'll buy a Copilot license. If you're lucky, maybe you'll get access to Claude or something. But there's not much more than that. There isn't a kind of cohesive strategy. And one of the challenges is that the landscape is moving so quickly that by the time somebody writes a playbook, unless that playbook is in very general terms in terms of how to think about this in the first place, so, how do we deal with, let's say, the regulatory environment or something like that, it's out of date. And so it is very much, how does your organization either learn from other organizations that are further along in the process? How do they bring in the kind of training that, you received, for example? Or how are they conducting their own kind of experiments where they understand enough about what the potential use cases are, but then because your industry better than anyone else does, the kind of work that you're doing, you're looking to identify where in your processes AI might actually be able to help some kind of bottlenecks, right? So one mistake I see a lot that companies make is the AI comes first, whereas in reality, the best companies realize that AI is in service of the business. AI is in service of, the bottom line. And what you're looking for is, given this is what our business does, where along the pathway is it, is it triaging potential customers? Is it once the customers come in, making sure that they have an excellent experience? Is it, is it aftercare of what's going on? Is it your actual product that needs an upgrade? And when we run these courses as well, like it's wonderful to hear where companies are. Like, I loved your example of, actually, we just built a layer so that we could actually understand across the organization all of these things that were previously diffused. And I was listening to managers personally. Now I get just a report and it's live and I know what's going on. That's an example of, a company that is experimenting and is at the forefront.
Yeah, we had a few other examples in the course as well, which is great. I guess thinking about how this plays out and how companies adopt it, I guess one of the things that I found is I've seen some companies setting goals around AI. Like you say, bringing the tools in and trying to kind of force it in and propagate it, right, in order to get the efficiencies. What I found as a company, and I think I took some of this from our course, was that our company goals didn't change, right? So our company goals stay the same. And then it's really about how can we use AI to better achieve those goals. Yeah. So the goals, even the department goals, don't move. It's really just rolling up into that. So we've got sales targets, we've got revenue targets, we've got efficiency targets, and so on.
Yeah, you're saying the same thing of what I said in a slightly different way, which is AI is in service of the business, not the business in service of AI. And so you're still doing what unless you're Allbirds and you decide to flip from, making shoes to training models, really your pivot is more about, these are the ways that we have traditionally done things. Yeah. There are new capabilities available on the market. Some of them come with some level of risk. Some of them come with some level of a learning curve. Is that worth it for us? What is the potential payoff? Is the risk actually worthwhile? And if it is, how do we learn enough and adapt the technologies available to us well enough? How do we differentiate in a marketplace where there are AI cowboys that are claiming all kinds of things? How do we evaluate if somebody is actually accurate or the claims that they're making are actually true? How do we protect ourselves if the company is not here a year from now? To what degree do we integrate the technology versus, trial it in some manner? Should we build it? Should we buy it? Should we co-create it? These are the kinds of decisions I think that companies are doing companies are making, but they're making them, again, I can't emphasize this enough, in service of whatever it is that actually makes them money.
Yeah.
At the moment, what we're seeing is a lot of money being spent and not seeing the returns because it hasn't been spent in effective ways.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, that's aligned with what we see, which is a lot of kind of bottom up. People, here are the tools, try and do something, make your work more efficient. And that's quite difficult to then roll up and account for and measure and actually see the efficiencies come through.
It doesn't have to be bottom up. There's a bottom up kind of learning process where there's everyday innovation and you're talking to the people at the coalface, so to speak. But there is also like an important role of leadership. So, placing an appropriate person with an appropriate amount of power to look across the organization, especially if you're a large organization, and look at all of those little experiments to avoid pilotitis. Where you get all of these little pilots, but they never bubble up into anything that rolls across the organization, or you're repeating the same experiment multiple times, or you're buying in the service that you've already bought in. So, cataloging and identifying everything that's going on, having a very clear AI strategy, as you guys did, put together your own AI playbook, and then having sufficient power in a leadership team or a particular leader such that all of that bottom-up learning can be kind of delivered across the organization in a top-down way.
Yeah, this is part of what we had. I kind of let everybody build things with the tools, and then I had 3 project managers create 3 versions of the same thing. Then you have the people problem of, well, each one is emotionally invested in theirs. Yeah. Now I've got to now I've got to walk back from that.
Best if we could avoid it in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I learned through doing the course review was that you have this book that you've written, A Theory of Everyone. I read it and I was actually quite surprised. I was surprised because first of all, I was expecting a book on AI.
Right.
And it's much more than that. It's a book about people, it's a book about humans, it's a book about human society, it's a book about groups that we form within human society and how we treat each other and how we perform and so much more. Maybe give us a bit of a breakdown of how you got to that and I guess what you're trying to achieve through it maybe.
Yeah, sure. So I was lucky in that I knew some OpenAI board members before ChatGPT dropped. So I happened to be in San Francisco and I was having coffee and they were like, we're releasing this new tool and, we've made these breakthroughs and, we think this could be very important. And so as I was learning more, I put it into the book, came out in 2023, but it was already in the manuscript, luckily, because I knew what was coming. So there is certainly like an element of what AI represents in the human story. But
there's blockchain in there as well, which was
there is blockchain,
which was also good
correct.
to see.
Yeah. So you might remember my tragic story around that as well. So what I'm interested in more broadly than just AI are the challenges that the humanity faces across the coming century. One of which is now AI. I don't think I would have said that, let's say 10 years ago. And to kind of tackle that problem, the problem is it's a little bit like the learnings across AI. Everybody's got a piece of the puzzle. The economists recognize that growth is important and the economy is important. The political scientists recognize that, polities and governance is important. The psychologists kind of recognize that there's a behavioral element to that everybody seems to miss, and you can't do anything in public health or governance or economics without understanding that human element. You've got lawyers who are constrained in all these ways. And so everybody's got kind of a piece of this puzzle. And what I wanted to do was to try to figure out how one would put that together. And so the starting point actually in my research, when I kind of pivoted from engineering to a new line of research, was to understand how humans started in the first place. As an engineer, one of the things you're trained to do is be able to zoom in and out of a system. You have to, especially if you're doing the full stack, like you have to be able to know what is going on in an individual component and why, when it bubbles up to a class or something, it's not behaving the way you expect it to, but then also how that system just fits together with every other piece. And if you don't have that kind of model where you can zoom in and out, it doesn't really work. So I wanted to kind of start from first principles. And so my initial work was on human evolution, actually the evolution of the human brain. So what are the selection pressures that led to our species, our lineage, diverging from all the other animals on Earth? So about 4 to 7 million years ago, we diverged from chimpanzees. We had a last common ancestor with them. What led to that? And the answer was that we kind of switched to a kind of distributed cognition. So, most animals, when they encounter an environment, are forced to genetically adapt. They have to get more fat and fur if it's cold, for example, or, more muscle if they need to outrun predators. And then they kind of learn things along the way. So we do that. We have genetic adaptations, and we also have kind of individual learning. But what we really started to do was to share knowledge with one another and selectively learn from one another, like what's happening in this podcast, where we're like, okay, somebody has some knowledge worth learning. I want to store a piece of that, apply it to my thing. And even though you don't realize it, there's a kind of collective brain of humanity solving puzzles, allowing ideas to flow in the social network. And the network itself is like one big neural network. And that one big neural network is actually what's solving a lot of things. So in that initial work, we kind of identified what the selection pressures were. We published papers on, how it explains primate brains, human brains, whale and dolphin brains, most recently octopus brains as a kind of different lineage. And then from there, you start to think about, the models naturally lead to how does innovation happen in this kind of collective brain? How does cooperation, like even in an organization, when are people likely to be at each other's throats and like not work together? And when might they actually work together toward the common good? So, in the book I write about, for example, Jeffrey Skilling and Enron, and the way that the Enron effect is what I called it, where Skilling sets up this situation in the company where he was
a very tough regime and a very
Yeah, exactly. So he's a big fan. So he loves Dawkins. He thinks he understands evolution. He thinks it's all about competition. It's actually about cooperation, and competition is two sides of the same coin. And so as a result, he goes rank and yank, which was very popular at the time, but he's very vicious about these things. So he's like, you rank the company, chop off, I think it was the bottom 15 or 5 to 15%. And he'd do this repeatedly. Now, what that actually does is it creates a zero-sum situation. And in a zero-sum situation, your win is my loss. My win is your loss. And so there's no desire, there's no incentive to work together under those circumstances. And, in contrast, if you read like Satya Nadella's book, Hit Refresh, there you see the opposite. You see what the models show, which is that if you can create a scenario where you tolerate risk, you allow people to try things and fail, but you are kind of all working together with a common thing. It's like, if it works, we share across the organization. It's kind of a series of startups, if you like. Then you've suddenly created this positive sum situation where it pays to work together because we all get a reward. We all get a piece of this regardless. So the model makes all of these very broad predictions that apply, as I like to say, from all the way from kind of cells to societies, right? Bacteria to businesses. So there's these common laws that apply across the board. And the book then, most recently, a lot of my work is on AI. And the reason for that is we're in new territory, right? So you cannot look to the past and say, well, we know what happened with computers, or we know what happened with the internet, or we know what happened with social media, and then say, well, this is what's going to happen with AI. You really have to think that through from first principles, and you have to understand why things happened the way that they did with agriculture, with industrialization, with computers, with the internet, and so on. Because, as everyone knows, AI is a general purpose technology. It is like electricity. Like, it's hard to say, like, it's not a particular app, it's not a particular feature. It is something that permeates the whole world, the way that you and I are now talking, thanks to microchips and a worldwide
a bit like the internet itself, I guess. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a lot.
Yeah, let me just unpack that a little bit. So first of all, I listened to a conversation this week, another podcast, where there was a self-proclaimed futurist. It was interesting. One of the questions he was asked was, what's the career that you recommend for your children in terms of AI and how things are evolving? And he said engineering. And he has an engineering background himself. And I was quite surprised by that, but he gave a similar explanation to the way you did at the beginning, which is about problem solving and understanding the world and so on, mathematical models to understand the world and so forth. So that's an interesting thread. Thinking about your book, first of all, I found it amazing on many, many levels, right? The thing that was interesting for me, and maybe, I also have an engineering background, this might have a part to do with it, because I kind of think of things in a logical way as an engineer, or as a software engineer. But I feel like the world we live in and the world that I've grown up into is incredibly complex now, especially recent times with social media, politics, all the sort of bubbles that we have, and false information, fake news, all these kind of things going on, sort of more tribalism, and just so much complexity and so many effects. And it's a real struggle to really sort of understand why things are happening, and sort of where you find yourself in that.
Yeah.
And I found myself reading your book, and piece by piece, layer by layer, it all made complete sense to me. Like there wasn't one thing in there that I could really take apart or say, no, that's not how it works, or that's not. It actually helped me to explain a lot of things that I see today. And I think part of what you did there is you tackled head on some very, very difficult and contentious areas of life, right?
Yeah.
How we're split into groups, how these groups view each other, why certain groups perform in a certain way in different areas, and how they interact. And today there's so many things that you just can't talk about because they're perceived as so sensitive. But if you unpack them into a kind of engineering mindset, and they actually work mechanically almost this way, and this is why. And you bring in the historical context, and this is why things evolved this way, and this is why that group evolved that way, and you bring them together, then it kind of all it sort of adds up in a way and is explained in a way that I haven't really seen before.
I really appreciate that, Adi. I mean, that's if I had to say, what would my ideal reader say about the book, I don't think it could have been articulated in any better way. I also have this. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, it's almost a must-read for society. Like I think if every human being that reads books read this book, I think the world would be a better place, genuinely, because I think we'd look at each other a little bit differently.
Yeah. I mean, I have an annoying tendency to just be honest in everything I do, and that includes in my writing. So I definitely I took the gloves off and I said I said the things that people don't often say. Yeah,
Yeah, but you've done it in a way that as I said, it's kind of it's based on data. It's based on it's not it doesn't go out and offend anyone. It doesn't. Exactly. It's we're like this for these reasons. That group is like that for these reasons. Like I said, it's something that's become more and more contentious over time to talk about groups. But actually, if you don't understand it, then it's difficult to understand why things move the way they do today, right?
And if you don't understand it, you can't solve it. Like you can't change the world you don't understand. You have to really grapple with the machinery. Yeah. No.
Exactly. So this might still sound a bit abstract to people, and if it does, then you have to read the book.
I feel like I should grab a copy or something. Since we're advertising it so much. Anyway, do read it.
No, I mean these are genuine feelings. Like I said, I feel it as an individual. There's also things I grapple with, also because of my own background, and I felt that this really made a lot of sense to me. The other book I'd probably compare it to is Yuval Noah Harari's *Sapiens*, which when I read that blew my mind. And I think that there are obviously a lot of parallels because you go through this whole human journey and unpack it, but I think you also look at it from quite a different angle and different perspective and bring something very different to it as well.
I like to think like I'm the science to his history. So he's a historian, I'm a scientist, and I don't know if he does the history well, but he does. The science is missing there, and so I bring that kind of science element to it.
So going back to the topic of AI, right? Because we laid the internet over human society, and it changed a lot of things. We then had social media on top of that, and that's changed even more, for better and for worse, and you kind of go through some of that in the book. What does AI do?
Yeah, so there's multiple things to say. So I mean, the first is we shouldn't necessarily expect to see the impact of AI immediately, because so there's something called the Solow paradox in economics, which is that people have said about the computers and also about the internet is that you see the effect of computers in everything except the productivity stats. You see the effect of the internet in everything except for the productivity stats. And when that was said in the kind of I think it was the late 80s or something, that was true. But then over time you did see it, and that's because initially when technologies come in, we don't know how to use them effectively, and sometimes we do silly things. Like there's a level of experimentation that's required in order to figure out how to use things most effectively. And this is true like in every technology. So, to even go back when we created our factories, the first factories were steam engines, right? And so you've got one steam engine and you've got one shaft that ran through the factory that was just turning, and then every other shaft through gears was operating off that one shaft. And then when electricity came out, at first, all that happened with the electricity is that instead of the steam running that one shaft, the electricity was running this one shaft. And that, seemed, you didn't see much of a productivity gain. The only thing that had happened is you'd shifted from steam to electricity. But over time, people realized, wait, if we're using electricity, why do we have a single shaft? You can have separate machines across the factory floor. And once that happens, and you've got this kind of diffusion where you can optimize the layout of the factory so that piece, now you're starting to see the kind of productivity gains.
Yeah, why don't we light it up and then the factory can run at night and so.
Exactly. All of these things start to happen. So similar kind of thing is happening. Same thing happened with computers, right? At first, computers were like fancier typewriters. Now I can like go back and edit my documents in Word Perfect or something if people are old enough to remember. And then over time, we figure out actually computers are capable of far more than this. Excel is this massive technology that completely, at first it's just a calculator, but now it's an operating system. It's an entire programming language for people. With AI, we're seeing similar things where people are experimenting in all kinds of ways. Some of it is not sensible. Some of it's actually worse than the human equivalent. But occasionally we chance upon something that's actually correct, effective, and is incredibly time-saving or productivity enhancing. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that if you think about what humans have access to for decision making, and I mean this from an evolutionary perspective, we have kind of our genes, right? We're human beings. We have genetic capabilities. We have our lifetime of learning things by ourselves. You can run your own little experiments. But the big thing is that we have this cultural corpus of beliefs and values and ways of things where we learn information from one another. And that has been true even in terms of the internet, right? So the internet isn't fundamentally changing what's happening. It's just that we're learning from one another in a more kind of distributed way and in a kind of broadcasting way. Anyone can share their skills on YouTube, and you can learn anything you really want.
Yeah, the access has completely changed, right?
It's completely changed. But we haven't fundamentally changed the basic rule, the basic pattern. We have always used machines to enhance ourselves physically and then automate ourselves physically, like with factories. Then we use machines to mentally augment ourselves, like let's say the internet, learning from one another, Excel. We have never in the history of the world outsourced the thinking. We've never in the history of the world said, hey, you do the thinking for me. That's never happened. So we're really in new territory, but we do know that it changes what we fundamentally do in terms of writing our software is the same, but suddenly we can have access to the entire cultural corpus of human knowledge in a way that's highly personalized. So, if you want to learn something on YouTube, you have to kind of scan through the video past all the things you already know to the thing that actually matters for this thing. If you go through a textbook, it's just like stuff. It's not directly applicable. But with AI, you can literally get it to solve your specific problem, highly personalized to you. And that's completely world changing. That is not something that we've ever had before. Even if you're a very data-oriented company or you're kind of a data-oriented person, you only make data-driven decisions. Often what you've had to do is rely on the average. What makes most companies succeed? What makes companies that are kind of like mine succeed? What makes
this is what research and papers and everything presents. Right?
Yeah, exactly. You get the mean, right? But I like to joke that the average person is a Chinese man named Muhammad making $15,000 a year. Yeah, it's not a real person. It's not a real thing.
Right.
The average doesn't represent each of our individual characteristics, but the AI can. And as it gets to know you, it gets to know your company. In context, it's making better decisions than you would have had access to before. So, we have as I describe it in the book, we have a fourth line of information: genes, culture, individual learning, and now access to this cultural corpus that's highly personalized, highly individualized. And that is a total game changer. And then the third piece is that we are in COVID, in the sense that we're seeing exponential growth on these models. The people who have been best able to predict the present moment are those who have believed in, what I call the line. Those who have believed in, since 2020, the fact that these capabilities have been doubling every 7 months. So however you want to measure it, roughly every 7 months, the models get twice as good as they were before. That is the same thing. Remember when COVID hit, people were like, okay, there's this weird thing in Wuhan. Oh, now it's in Italy. I don't know what's going on. And then you see hundreds turn to thousands, turn to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, then millions. And suddenly the whole world is locked down. And it happens in months, right? We're seeing a similar thing. We're seeing a very similar pattern here where what models were capable of last year was, okay. What models were capable of earlier this year is still different to what models are capable of today. And according to that line, we should right about now have a model that's too powerful to give the public access. And right on time, Mythos arrives. And then export bans will follow from that. And what we should be seeing is behind the scenes that further accelerates the process, because the frontier companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, are able to use those models themselves to improve the models. And so we're in this scenario where things are rapidly happening, but the public isn't aware of it. Like, from their perspective, they don't realize that at the moment you can get maybe half a day's reliable work out of one of these models. But by the end of the year, it'll be maybe a little over a day's work. And by next year, maybe a week's work. That is a game changer. The fact that all of this cognitive work is now potentially doable by a machine. Yeah, I don't want to say, like, we can keep talking. You should say something, Adi.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts about this, but one of them is just going back to what you said at the beginning of that section around the factory, right? And the steam engine and the electricity and what that did. First of all, having started the company in the blockchain space, that kind of resonates a lot, because we had a lot of companies using it. They plugged it in some way.
Oh, yeah.
So in inverted commas, they were using it, but they weren't really making the most of electricity, right?
Yes.
They hadn't adapted or changed the model or the way they were using the technology in the way that they actually plug into the benefits of the technology.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the real struggle with AI now as well, with organizations, the way they're structured, the people, the resistance, how you propagate this, how you manage the initiatives, like you say, top down, all of that. I think there's all of that going on. The second thought is what I said earlier about companies, what companies are trying to achieve and the business objectives. You touched on this. I think there's an exception to that, which is where your industry changes, right? Where your offering is now, or maybe part of what you offer now has to change because of what AI offers.
That's correct. That's very.
What your customers can maybe do on their own.
Yes, that's exactly correct.
So yeah, I mean, thoughts about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, the marketplace is an evolutionary system. Companies, they either evolve or they go extinct. And now there's a new apex predator on the market. And, that apex predator is capable of eating your business and eating your consumers. You first saw it in terms of Stack Overflow. That's where all engineers went, and suddenly nobody goes there. And then, you start to see it in terms of outsourced developers. Right? Suddenly people are building software on demand. Now, is it enterprise grade? Is it, does it meet all quality assurance? Does it meet all regulatory ISO standards and so? No, it doesn't. But for like a quick app to suddenly manage your life and your to-dos or, project management, it's fantastic. So we're seeing in entire industries, an Illustrator, right, suddenly disappear. And we're also starting to see Jevons paradox, right? So in economics, Jevons paradox is that because there was kind of latent demand for something, when the price actually falls, usage actually goes, it's not just usage, but overall amount of usage goes up. So in other words, there's latent demand for electricity, for example, but the only thing preventing anyone from using as much electricity as they can is that it's very expensive. So if the price of electricity falls, it's not just that like demand goes up and meets what was previously there. So the per unit electricity has gone down, but we're still using overall the same amount of electricity. No, it actually goes up. We're using more electricity than we were using before. So we're seeing a similar kind of thing in Jevons paradox when it comes to AI. There are things you couldn't do before. You couldn't have software on demand. You couldn't have analytics as you wish. And so you're able to ask and use these, or even just simply marketing or illustrations or any of these kinds of things. I mean, so I'm the chief science advisor at an AI company called Electric Twin. And what Electric Twin does is we create synthetic audiences. And the nice thing about the company, in part because of my involvement, is that it's actually science-based. It's not like three guys out of college trying to use an LLM to simulate a human being. It's actually all of the science behind it. And what we're seeing is that suddenly, in order to make good decisions, companies need to know what their customers want. They need to know what their potential customers want. And it used to be a very expensive process to actually get that information. And so the amount of research that a company would do would be minimal. Because the return on investment, the return was always there, but the investment was too high to justify it. Now, because you can ask a highly reliable synthetic audience something in a matter of minutes, suddenly we're seeing companies do so much more research because they're able to make better and faster decisions on the back of this. And if they really need to check, that's when they go back out in the market. You have a human simulator in this case. So, Ben Warner, who's the one of the co-founders of the company, he calls it Jensen's paradox. So, after Jensen Huang, the founder of NVIDIA.
I think this also plays into one of the big debates of our times around jobs, because it's also because something can be done using AI. Will you need less people for doing these types of activities, or Will you as a company and maybe your customers want a lot more of everything, in which case maybe the same amount of people doing a lot more rather than less people doing the same?
Exactly. And in the first place we're seeing that is in software, right? So the fact that we now have software agents has changed what it means to be a software developer. People aren't writing a lot of code themselves. They're managing fleets of agents and managing them in clever ways so that you're doing quality assurance and you have reviews as part of the kind of AI-driven process, the AI factory, if you like. But actually, if you look, Anthropic is paying more than they ever did, and they're hiring more engineers than ever before. And we're seeing that across the board. Now, it could be that that's stage one. So stage one is, you can actually now write, like there was always latent demand for software. And software engineers were paid a lot of money because they couldn't write as much software as the world actually wanted or needed. But now that AI is there, you still need software engineers, but now they're able to write so much more software, so much faster. And so you actually need more engineers to take advantage of these new possibilities. But at some point, it could be in the future that the AI itself is managing those fleets. And then suddenly we were hiring more and more engineers, and then we're not hiring any engineers at all, right? So it's very difficult to predict these kinds of things a priori, but I don't think it's straightforward that just because AI is entering your industry, it means there's going to be fewer people needed. It could actually be that more people are needed, but they are way more productive than they once were because they're either augmented or they're leading automated teams of AI agents that they work alongside.
I think all we can do right now is lean in.
Yeah. It's one of those things where you want to be keeping up. Like I think, maybe many people of our generation, they might remember when computers first came out and, people were looking for people with typing skills and word skills and Excel skills. And, those people had an immediate advantage on the market. There's a similar kind of thing here where the people who have some knowledge of their own domain and their own industry and are able to amplify that effect using these amazing new technologies and are keeping on top of those, have an immediate advantage over those that are see no evil, hear no evil, and just like pretending like nothing's going on and everything's going to return to normal. It's not. It's not, because actually we're just at the beginning of COVID.
Yeah, agreed. I think on that note, Michael, I'd like to invite you back and have another conversation in 7 months.
Yeah. Let's do it.
When the capabilities double what it is now.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
On that note, thank you very much, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise,
Yeah,
Adi. So good to see you
let's see
again.
where we are in a few months again.